6 in the morning, and I'm standing on my porch barefoot, holding a mug of coffee that still smelled like burnt hazelnut, when 3 sheriff cruisers come flying up my gravel driveway, so fast the rocks sounded like gunfire against their doors, and right behind them, parked nice and neat like she was attending a garden party instead of a police raid, sat Evelyn Mercer in her pearl white Range Rover, filming me through the windshield with a smile that made my stomach turn. One of the deputies stepped out and yelled, "Sir, we got reports of violent trespassing and unlawful obstruction of public water access." Public water access to my lake. My family's lake. The same lake where my grandfather taught me to fish and where my mother's ashes were scattered under a blood-orange sunset 3 years ago. And that was the exact moment I realized this woman wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to erase us. My name's Wade Ashcroft. I'm 46 years old, born and raised outside Bitter Creek, Wyoming, and until all this happened, I thought I understood what greed looked like. Turns out I didn't know a damn thing. See, my family's ranch wasn't rich people land. It wasn't one of those Yellowstone postcard properties bought by hedge fund millionaires pretending to be cowboys on Instagram. It was working land. 1,200 acres of brutal winters, broken fences, and calves born at 2 in the morning while your fingers froze inside wet gloves. My great-grandfather, Eli Ashcroft, settled there in 1891 with a horse, a rifle, and an iron stubborn streak that somehow survived 4 generations. We had one thing everybody in the valley envied, though. Blackwater Lake. Spring-fed, crystal clear, tucked between pine hills like God dropped a piece of Montana into Wyoming by accident. Then came Juniper Ridge Estates. 5 years earlier, developers bulldozed the neighboring valley and built 180 luxury homes for wealthy retirees and remote workers escaping California. They marketed it like paradise for people who wanted authentic Western living without ever smelling manure. And somehow, leading that whole polished suburban circus was Evelyn Mercer. You ever meet somebody who smiles with their mouth, but not their eyes? That was Evelyn. Perfect blonde hair, expensive boots that never touched mud, voice smooth as TV commercials. She sold houses before marrying Randall Mercer, a regional banking executive who acted like owning cufflinks made him royalty. Together, they ran the HOA like a private kingdom. At first, the complaints were almost funny. My cattle smelled bad. The coyotes sounded threatening at night. My irrigation pumps ruined the ambience during outdoor yoga classes. I honestly thought they'd get over it eventually. Country life has a way of humbling people. Then her son entered the picture. Logan Mercer was 24 years old, permanently sunburned. Always carrying a drone camera around like it was an extra body part. Kid called himself an outdoor lifestyle creator, which apparently meant trespassing while talking into a GoPro. One afternoon, I rowed down to Blackwater and found him standing on my dock with 6 strangers, filming some sponsored whiskey commercial while music blasted across the shoreline. I remember saying, "You lost, son?" And he laughed, actually laughed, then pointed around like he owned the place. "Relax, man. We're creating exposure for the area." Exposure. That word stuck in my teeth like gravel. A few weeks later, I found beer cans near the North Bank, where my mother used to sit reading books in the evenings. Then campfire pits. Then tire tracks through protected grassland. Every weekend, there were more people, influencers, photographers, tourists paying Logan for exclusive wilderness experiences. He was selling my family's history one selfie at a time. The first real confrontation happened on a Thursday evening. Evelyn came to my ranch carrying a leather folder under one arm and wearing that fake concerned expression rich people use right before they stab you politely. "Wade," she said sweetly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding community access rights." She spread documents across my kitchen table like she was unveiling sacred scripture. According to her paperwork, Blackwater Lake had historical recreational protections tied to county land agreements decades earlier. meaning I supposedly had no right blocking Juniper Ridge residents from using it. I stared at the papers quietly while rain tapped against the kitchen windows. The documents looked official at first glance, county stamps, signatures, legal formatting. But then I noticed something stupid. One page referenced Juniper Ridge Estates. In 1984. Problem was, Juniper Ridge didn't exist until 2021. I looked up slowly and asked, "You forged these yourself, or did your husband's lawyers help?" Her smile twitched for half a second. That tiny little twitch told me everything. But instead of exploding, instead of throwing her off my property like I wanted to, I remembered something my grandfather once told me after catching a neighbor stealing cattle feed. Never interrupt somebody while they're digging their own grave. So I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of cold coffee, and said calmly, "Well, I guess I'll have my attorney take a look." That's when her eyes changed. Because for the first time since this whole thing started, Evelyn Mercer realized the rancher she'd been mocking might not be as stupid as she thought. And honestly, neither of us understood yet how ugly things were about to become. The funny thing about people like Evelyn Mercer is they never think the first lie will be enough. Once somebody gets away with a small manipulation, they start believing they're untouchable, and that's exactly what happened over the next 2 months. What started with forged paperwork turned into a full-blown campaign to make me look dangerous, unstable, maybe even crazy enough that the county would eventually force me off my own land. It started quietly. County inspectors showing up every other week because anonymous complaints claimed my cattle operation violated environmental regulations. Then came noise complaints because my ranch hand started work before sunrise. Then somebody reported unsafe firearm activity after I sighted in a hunting rifle on my own property 2 miles from the nearest house. Every complaint traced back to Juniper Ridge. More specifically, Evelyn. Sheriff Dalton stopped by one afternoon, looking embarrassed before he even stepped out of his truck. "Wade," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I gotta respond to these calls whether they're nonsense or not." I handed him a cold bottle of water and said, "How many complaints this week?" 7. Damn, I muttered. Woman's treating law enforcement like Uber Eats. He actually laughed at that. Then his face tightened again. "Look, off the record, she's building a paper trail, trying to paint a picture." I already knew. And honestly, that realization sat heavier on me than the threats themselves. See, if somebody punches you, at least you know where the fight is. But Evelyn fought like poison in groundwater. Slow, invisible, spreading through every part of your life until people started looking at you differently without even realizing why. Then Logan poured gasoline on the whole thing. One Saturday morning, I rode down toward Blackwater and nearly had a heart attack. There were 23 vehicles lined along my access road, drones flying overhead, folding tables set up beside the shoreline like some damn music festival. Logan had posted an online ad for the Hidden Cowboy Lake Experience, charging people $400 each for photography access, fishing rights, and overnight camping. $400 to strangers on my property. I watched a woman pose beside the water in a bikini while another guy filmed cinematic drone footage over the dock my father built with his bare hands in 1978. And standing there in the middle of it all was Logan, grinning in sunglasses like a frat boy who'd just discovered capitalism. When he noticed me approaching on horseback, he spread his arms dramatically. "Hey, everybody, landowners here." A few people awkwardly turned toward me, probably expecting some angry hillbilly meltdown for their TikTok feeds. Instead, I climbed down slow, tied my horse to a fence post, and walked right up to Logan until we were almost nose to nose. "You charging admission now?" I asked quietly. He smirked. "People love authentic Western experiences." "You know what's authentic?" I said, getting sued into the dirt. That wiped the smile off him for maybe half a second before Evelyn's voice floated across the shoreline. "Wade, there's no need for hostility." God, even now I can still hear that woman's voice. She came walking down the hill wearing cream-colored riding boots that probably cost more than my first truck. Randall followed behind her in pressed jeans and sunglasses, hands tucked casually into his pockets like he was inspecting property he already owned. Evelyn gestured toward the crowd. These families are simply enjoying natural resources the community has every right to appreciate. Community? I snapped. Lady, your gated subdivision isn't a community. It's a themed Airbnb with an HOA. A couple people laughed under their breath. Her face tightened. Randall stepped forward then, speaking for the first time. Careful, Wade. Reputation matters in counties like this. That line stuck with me, because it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. 3 days later, Channel 8 News aired a story titled, Local Rancher Accused of Threatening Families Over Lake Access. They used drone footage of my ranch while Evelyn stood beside, crying children talking about community intimidation and hostile behavior. Logan posted clips online pretending I'd aggressively confronted paying guests while he played protector of family recreation. Overnight, strangers online started calling me a violent redneck. Some idiot from Denver emailed me, saying people like me shouldn't be allowed to own natural resources. Another said the state should seize my land for public enjoyment. You want to know the worst part? For a minute, it worked. Feed suppliers stopped returning calls. A local equipment dealer delayed financing approval on a replacement tractor. Folks around town suddenly got real polite in that uncomfortable way people do when they think trouble might rub off on them. And through all of it, Evelyn kept smiling. Then came the restraining order. I nearly laughed when Deputy Dalton handed me the paperwork because the accusations were so ridiculous they sounded written by a bored screenwriter. According to Evelyn, I'd threatened physical violence during multiple encounters and created an environment of fear for Juniper Ridge residents. But she made one critical mistake. She forgot I grew up ranching cattle, and ranchers document everything. See, after the Forge Papers incident, I installed trail cameras all around Blackwater to monitor trespassing. Motion activated, cloud backed up, time-stamped. Mostly I wanted proof of property damage. What I accidentally collected instead was evidence of an organized campaign against me. Hours of footage. Logan directing commercial shoots while claiming ownership of the lake. Evelyn coaching residents before filing complaints. Randall discussing squeezing me financially until I sold the property. And then, something even uglier. One night around 2 a.m, 3 hooded figures slipped onto my north pasture and cut sections of fencing. By sunrise, nearly 40 head of cattle wandered on a County Road 16, causing traffic chaos clear into Bitter Creek. One calf got hit by a pickup truck. Had to put the poor thing down myself. That morning while I stood there in wet grass with blood on my jeans and my hand resting on that calf's neck, something inside me changed. Up until then, I'd still believed maybe this could all be settled civilly. That moment killed the last bit of patience I had left. Sheriff Dalton reviewed the footage personally. One of the trucks caught on camera belonged to Logan. But before arrests could happen, Randall's attorneys intervened, claiming the footage was inconclusive. Money protecting money. Same old American story. Still, the cameras gave me something more valuable than revenge. They gave me time. Because while everybody in Juniper Ridge thought they were winning, I started digging into county records, tax maps, historical easements, utility agreements. Mostly out of spite at first, if I'm being honest. Couldn't sleep anyway. Might as well learn how deep the rabbit hole went. And that's when I found it. An old service district document buried in county archives from 1963. At first it looked like boring municipal paperwork. Emergency services agreements, rural infrastructure oversight, utility coordination. But halfway down page 14, I saw my grandfather's name. Thomas Ashcroft, designated administrative land steward for the Bitter Creek Rural Service Territory. I read the paragraph 3 times before the meaning finally hit me. Then I sat back in that dusty records office, so hard my chair squealed against the floor. because according to county law, ownership of our ranch automatically transferred administrative oversight authority for every emergency and utility contract connected to the surrounding territory, including Juniper Ridge Estates, which meant for the last 5 years, I hadn't just been paying taxes while Evelyn Mercer weaponized county resources against me. I'd unknowingly been the man legally authorized to approve, deny, audit, and terminate the very services keeping her perfect little kingdom alive. And suddenly the whole war looked very different. I didn't sleep the night I found those county documents. I sat at my kitchen table with an old desk lamp glowing over paperwork while coyotes cried somewhere out past the eastern fence line, and every time I reread those service district statutes, the same thought kept running through my head. Evelyn Mercer had spent 2 years trying to convince everybody I was powerless. Turns out I'd been the most dangerous man in the county without even knowing it. The next morning I drove straight into town and met with a lawyer named Claire Bennett, a woman in her 60s who looked sweet until she started talking law. 20 minutes into reviewing the documents, she slowly removed her glasses, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Wade, do you understand what this means?" I got a pretty good idea. "No," she replied softly. "I don't think you do." Then she smiled, and that smile right there. That was the exact moment the war changed sides. Within 48 hours, Claire filed formal notices demanding a full audit of every service contract tied to Juniper Ridge Estates. Police response agreements, private security billing, utility subsidies, road maintenance reimbursements. Every dollar. The panic started almost immediately. Evelyn began calling county officials nonstop, trying to challenge my authority, but the documents were airtight. My family's ranch had been the anchor property for the district since the Kennedy administration. Nobody ever updated the structure because nobody ever expected the ranch owner to actually use those powers, especially not against wealthy suburban homeowners. Then the financial records started coming in. And Lord, it was worse than we imagined. Private HOA landscaping billed as emergency infrastructure maintenance. Security patrol contracts inflated almost 300% through shell companies connected to Randall Mercer's banking partners. Public district money covering Juniper Ridge clubhouse expenses, pool repairs, even wine tasting events marketed as community safety gatherings. Over $2 million missing. I remember staring at those spreadsheets while Claire quietly muttered, "These idiots basically built a criminal conspiracy with accounting software." And right in the middle of all that corruption sat Logan's influencer business. Turns out his wilderness experiences had generated nearly $300,000 in undeclared income through sponsorships, access fees, and corporate partnerships, all connected to illegal commercial activity on my land. The IRS got interested real quick after that. Funny how invincible people stop acting brave once federal agencies enter the conversation. Evelyn still tried, though. God bless her arrogant little heart. She really did. She organized an emergency HOA town hall claiming I was threatening essential services out of personal revenge. Called me unstable, dangerous. Said I wanted families to suffer because I hated outsiders. But by then residents were already turning on her. Nobody likes discovering their HOA fees were funding luxury corruption while property values collapse on local news every night. 3 board members resigned before the meeting even started. Then came the moment I think Evelyn finally realized she'd lost. She showed up on my ranch alone one evening, just before sunset. No muck-up, no luxuriatetot, no audience. I was repairing fence posts near Blackwater when I saw her walking across the pasture, struggling through mud in those expensive little boots she used to wear like armor. For a second, she almost looked human. "Wade," she called softly. I kept hammering nails. She stopped a few feet away. "This has gone too far." I remember laughing at that. Not loud, not cruel, just tired. "Too far." I said, "Your son trespassed on sacred family land for profit. You forged documents. You lied to police. You destroyed my business. One of my calves died because of your little games. Her voice cracked then. I can make this disappear. That got my attention. She stepped closer carefully, lowering her voice like we were sharing secrets in church. 50,000 cash. We settle privately. You stop the audits, we leave the county, and this whole thing ends. There it was. Bribery. Right into the body mic, Claire insisted I wear any time Evelyn came near me. I looked at her for a long moment while wind rolled across the lake behind us. And honestly, that's when I realized Evelyn still didn't understand what she'd done. To her, Blackwater was just property. To me, it was my mother's laughter echoing across summer water. My father teaching me how to cast lines before sunrise. My grandfather smoking silently beside the dock after funerals. She thought she was buying silence over land. But you can't buy somebody's bloodline. You should go home, Evelyn, I said quietly. Before the FBI gets there before you do. I swear the color drained out of her face so fast it looked painful. The public hearing happened 8 days later. County courthouse packed wall to wall. Reporters everywhere. Ranchers standing shoulder to shoulder beside residents from Juniper Ridge who suddenly wanted answers about where their money went. Claire presented the financial evidence first, then the trail camera footage, then Logan's tax records, then the recordings. By the time Evelyn's bribery attempt echoed through courthouse speakers, you could literally hear people gasping. Randall looked like a corpse. Logan kept staring at the floor. And Evelyn, she just sat there frozen while the entire image she built around herself collapsed in real time. Sheriff deputies arrested Randall before the hearing even ended. Financial fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. Federal investigators seized banking records that afternoon. Logan accepted a plea deal 6 months later after tax evasion charges stacked up high enough to ruin the rest of his life. And Evelyn Mercer lost everything. House, reputation, marriage. Every fake friend who used to orbit around her disappeared overnight once the cameras stopped admiring her. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona and sells timeshares outside Scottsdale. Funny ending for a woman who once tried stealing Wyoming wilderness like it was a handbag at a country club. These days, Blackwater Lake is quiet again. Some mornings I sit on that same dock with coffee in my hands, watching fog drift over the water while elk move through the treeline. And sometimes I think about how close I came to losing all of it simply because somebody wealthy believed old families don't fight back anymore. But we do. Maybe quieter than people expect. Maybe slower. But land teaches patience better than anything on earth. And eventually, patience collects its debt. So now I want to ask you something. If somebody moved into your hometown tomorrow and started acting like your family history meant nothing, how far would you go to protect it? And be honest down in the comments, because I've learned something after all this mess. Most HOA drama isn't really about rules. It's about power. It's about people who mistake kindness for weakness, right up until they push the wrong person too far. And trust me, some folks smile while they're losing. Others smile because they already know how the story ends.